my take is, and I think the way that they see it is, that it's not going to be like when unsupervised is working, like it works. And it's not going to be, I mean, there will be some jurisdictions that are resistant, but I don't think that they see it, and I don't see it as like that's a major limiter for being able to start the ramp to get millions of vehicles out there. One of the things, I mean, I was super, super happy to see the feature set that they chose for building the Cybercab. Like if you had asked me, I would have said, 2-person vehicle, lots of cargo space, cheap, as cheap as you can make it. So you can crank out tons and tons of these things so that you can take, remember, if the mission is to, accelerate the advent, accelerate the conversion of transport to electricity, like the taxi, the Cybercab style Robotaxi, that is faster than any other thing you can do. It's faster than coming out with 10 more models. It's faster than coming out with a $20,000 retail car. It's faster than everything because one Robotaxi takes 5 ICE cars off the road. And if these things cost half as much and you can make them twice as fast because they're using this unbox process, you can ramp that factory like nuts. Like normally you would have imagined that, like how fast can Tesla make enough cars to displace all the ICE vehicles? Just looking at the US, not less of the world. Like you got to build a lot of cars for a long time. You got to build factories to build those cars. Like it's a huge, long ramp. The Robotaxi, just having Robotaxi capabilities, that instantly dials that number down by a factor of 5. Like what other thing could you, like you can't grow 5 times faster than Tesla's doing this. It's just, they're already just like, they've pulled all the stops out and they're going as fast as they can, right? The Robotaxi, it's just a huge lever on being able to do that. The other thing that gets you like making it cheap and making it easy to make, as simple as possible, getting all the parts out, right? So that you can afford to just really crank these puppies out and ramp as fast as you can. Like once the technology, because if you look at how much better it got in the last year, and then you imagine, okay, so now FSD, we've got unsupervised working. Well, how good is unsupervised a year later, 2 years later? Like it's nuttily better 2 years later after that kind of stuff. So if you start ramping the Cybercab at the point when, unsupervised is working, initially, you're doing it mostly with fleet vehicles that already exist, because all the other cars, every other Tesla can also function as Robotaxi. So you can start with those, but you pull the trigger on that production line when you know that the window is open and the market can start accepting those cars. You ramp as fast as you can, and I think the market, demand will grow faster. You will be manufacturing constrained very quickly, and then it'll be like build a second factory, build a third factory, and one of the great things about the Cybercab is that you can fill that pipe and get those cars out there. It's going to take like 25 million vehicles minimum to saturate what I think is the minimum addressable market in the United States. So how long would it take Tesla to get? This is just in the US.
25 million Cybercabs.
25 million total Teslas, because they're all Robotaxis. Total Teslas. Got
it. 25 million Robotaxis.
Cybercab can do like 90% of the jobs, right? So, as many of those as you can get out, great, because they're less expensive. So having one sit idle, all through the night, or there's this narrative that I've heard a couple of times, people speculating about how this works. This idea that, the Cybercab is the kind of thing that Tesla would use for its own fleet, and then you would have customer cars to like deal with the ups and downs, because this thinking is that the cars are expensive and you want to keep them busy, right? So you borrow customer cars when you need extra. The kind of, the way that Uber brings more drivers into the fleet when they're busy, and they lay those guys off, or they tell them to go home when they don't have very many rides for them. Like that's a thing. And I think that misunderstands the economics of this whole thing, right? I did this economic model of like rideshare based on actual data in Chicago for a non-pandemic year. And I looked at, different ways. The thing is, you could afford to buy and own all the cyber cabs, or you could have a mixed cyber cab, Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model X fleet, right, in Chicago. And, half the cars are idle half the time because, the usage is peaky. There's the morning rush, there's the evening rush, there's Friday and Saturday evenings when people take taxis to go out, right? You get these, and then in the middle of the night, you've got a lot less activity, right? During the middle of the day, you have relatively less activity. If you build out this fleet, so to do Chicago takes 10,000 cars, right? To be able to satisfy peak demand in Chicago, 200 square miles. I forget what it's 90 million rides over the course of a year, right? I forget. So a couple million a week. You need 10,000 cabs to do that. Those cabs, they average 50,000 miles a year per cab. And, at peak times, all 10,000 of them are busy. And, you got 5-minute wait times for pickups or whatever the deal is. Most of the rest of the day, half of it is idle. In the middle of the night, 90% of the fleet might be idle or something like that. You don't have anything for them to do. So you pre-position them so that you can minimize pickup times. And then your pickup times for most of the day, when it's not really busy, are 30 seconds or 1 minute, right? I mean, you get your phone out,
Instant.
Phone, get me a cab. And by the time you can walk to the curb, the thing is waiting for you, like super, super short delivery. And what does it cost to deliver that service? Even with all, the cars, half the cars idle half the time. It's like 30 cents a mile, 40 cents a mile. That's with those cars idle. Because remember, these are super cheap cars. And when they're not driving, they're not using electricity, right? They're not wearing out their tires. They're not wearing out their seats.
You're not paying a driver.
If they're not carrying people around, like all the operational costs reduced to just the amortization. And, this is a $20,000 vehicle that, it can easily gross 50,000, like at $1 a mile. Like if you're charging people $1 a mile, and that's crazy cheap. Like at $1 a mile, you can get so much. Like that almost displaces like all light vehicle traffic, right? At $1 a mile, you can economically get to almost everything in that space. And that's $50,000 a year that these things are grossing, maybe 30,000 that they're netting after all that. And the car's $20,000. You build it once, it goes 10 years. Like it's crazy. Like you could lower the cost per mile down to 50 cents, have half the fleet be idle half the time, and the economics still make sense. Like you don't. Now, what I'm trying to make the case for is this business model. It is not constrained by, this peakiness. Because the thing is, when you don't have a person sitting with that car all the time who has to be, we pay people, time is expensive, right? Robot time is cheap, practically free. It's the amortization. The amortization on a $20,000 car is like nothing compared to the value of the service, right? So you can have, you can build the fleet out to satisfy peak demand. Half of it can be idle half the time. And the economics are still way better than anything we have today. It just like on a cost, convenience standpoint, it crushes everything. That's the beauty of this model. Like this isn't robotaxis as a transport modality in the United States. They're not a slight improvement over buses and trains and airplanes and driving your own car. They're not a slight improvement. They're a massive improvement to the point where just like nothing else can compete. And so even if there's some handicaps to their economics, they're still going to crush it. They're just going to kill everything. The thing is, the economics of this stuff, that's the thing that makes the mission happen, right? The economics, the convenience are so good that they create the opportunity to ramp as fast as possible because economically you can totally justify it, right? You can justify building out that thing as fast as you can. And so what we get instead is, instead of it taking 20, 30 years to electrify the fleet, it takes 5 years, right? So you just gained like 30 years of like not dumping CO2 into the atmosphere, right?
Wow. Unsupervised FSD is by far the biggest lever Tesla will ever pull to drive the advent of sustainable transport by a factor of 5. I mean, that's basically. It's so obvious. Yeah,
and it works so well because the economics are so nuttily good, right? Like it's hard normally, you could imagine like you're at VW or something like that. And you have this great engineering, they're developing their self-driving technology, and they go into the board of directors and we have this amazing technology. It's going to reduce the size of the car market by 5x, right?
Gotcha. Can you try it again with a German accent? Can you try with a German accent?
Car business, right?
Not do it with a German accent, James. Can you do it with a German accent?
Anyway, the thing is, the economics have to be nuttily good for a company to basically be willing to cannibalize its own business on the scale that a car company would be cannibalizing their business. Remember, like if robotaxis really win big, the worldwide market, which is like 100 million cars a year, it's going to shrink to 20 million cars a year. Light vehicles, right? Like, there are not a lot of industries that would embrace that. Why would you embrace it? The one situation where you embrace it is where the new business, even though the volume is a lot smaller, it's way more profitable. And in order for a smaller business to be radically more profitable than a bigger business, it has to have nutty margins, right? And Robotaxi satisfies these, which is why it can do this. And it will do this because, it's like the thing with batteries and solar, right? People just don't get that how cheap batteries and solar are going to be compared to everything else. So they talk about it, you still need all of these backup things. You still need the distribution. Oh, it would be better if we put them on roofs or in deserts. People imagine all of these constraints. So like, no. It's like, you don't get it. This stuff is going to be so much cheaper than everything else. It's just going to win because at the end of the day, if the price is 3x cheaper and it works perfectly and you can distribute it anywhere, it doesn't have transmission constraints. It works for microgrids. It'll work almost anywhere on the planet, right? It's just going to win. And so once the tech is on track to get to that price point, you're done. That's just what's going to happen. And that's where we are with robotaxis, right? Robotaxis are so much better, just fundamentally, in terms of the economics of the quality service that they will deliver, that they just win. And so it's once that that's going to happen, like the mission, you just wait for it to unfold, right? I mean, you have to do the work still. It's not like everybody at Tesla gets to go home, right? I mean, this still has to be done. But there's not really a question about, if they execute, how things are going to turn out.
So in your Chicago model, James, how have you thought about the price elasticity of demand? I mean, I think whatever the current size of rideshare market in Chicago is, that's going to assume a price of what, $2.50 a mile or yeah. So what happens when you go to $1 a mile or 75 cents a mile?
That's a really good question. I've thought a lot about it and I don't know the answer because there's a bunch of different ways there are different ways I could imagine it working out. And I think what you're going to see Tesla do is they're going to go in there and they're going to try something and they're going to see how it works and then they're going to adapt, right? So what I think you want to price a service at what the market will bear because that gets the best. So imagine you price a service cheap enough that you can generate more demand that you can satisfy. The quality of the service in the single most important metric of the service quality declines because wait times are going to go up because people have to wait. And you don't want wait times to be 15 minutes. A 15-minute wait time is just a qualitatively different experience than a 5-minute wait time is. If you use rideshare, waiting 15 minutes, maybe 30, if it doesn't make it on time, is a completely different use case than 5-10 minutes worst case, right? 5-10 minutes worst case, you don't miss your dinner reservation. You're not late to the airport or whatever the deal is. Maybe 30 minutes, now you're talking about missing your dinner reservation. And if it gets much longer than that, well, now maybe you miss your plane. So now you have the public transit problem where you got to go everywhere an hour early because you can't rely on the system to actually get you. That's just a different beast, right? So I really having tried to work this a couple of different ways. Personally, I think the thing that makes sense is charge what the market will bear. Right? Which starts at, we know what that is right now. We know that's $2.50, right? That's what rideshare is in the US right now. We know that you can keep 1 million taxis busy in the US, because that's what we got. We have 1 million rideshare vehicles in the US. They stay busy at $2.50 a mile. Incidentally, the average ride is relatively short, but there are plenty of long rides. Long rides are cheaper. Short rides are more expensive. So the average ride is $4 a mile, but the average mile is $2.50, which is like, both of those stats are true. And it's because there's this long tail on how long the rides are, right? So when you think about what, when you use the service, like if you're in downtown Chicago and you like want to go to a show or you want to go home, more often than not, you're paying $4 a mile, right? But the average revenue that the service provider makes is $2.50. And the reason for that is because the really long rides, the per mile rate comes down, and they have a lot of miles on them. So they bring the mile average down, but they don't bring the ride average down because there's few miles. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, totally. So these are equally true. It's $2.50 a mile is what you pay for the average mile. The average rider is experiencing, a convenience ride, a short distance in a city center is like $4 a mile. So that's what the market bears today. If you want to go a long way, you're paying $2 a mile. If you're on a short ride, you're paying $4 a mile, right? That's what I see on Waymo, Lyft, Uber in San Francisco, which is where I use them. So that's what the market bears in the short term. It costs less than $1 with existing Tesla vehicles. I mean, I don't actually know what their backroom operational cost is going to be, but the cost of operating an EV is really well known. Anybody who's had an EV, it's very easy to figure out what the operating cost of the vehicle itself is. Figuring out the amortization, insurance, like I did all that kind of stuff, super easy. So like 90% of the things that go into the car, we don't know what the backroom operation is, and that's going to depend to some extent on how Tesla decides to organize that business. It could be a little higher, it could be a little lower. But my guess is that, they can supply this service, like their operational cost of providing this service is like 50 cents a mile going out the door. So when the business starts, $4 a mile for short rides, $2.50 for longish ride, $2.50 for the average ride, 50 cents for cost to provide the service, that's an 80% gross margin. That's a good business, right? And you can, as you saturate the market, obviously you bring the price down, right? Like at $2.50, you get a certain number of miles, and you keep feeding more and more vehicles into the fleet, and then you bring the price down. You bring the price down such that you can keep the wait times at a point where people consider the service to be a high quality service. It's not a bargain basement service where you're sacrificing your time and occasionally you don't want to get where you're going, but it's cheap. It's a high quality service. You're paying a little more for it, but you're paying less than current rideshare significantly, and you're getting a really high quality service, and the wait times are low, right? And then the price you ramp down. And so I did that model. That's a model I think works. And now there are two data points. One data point we understand really well is the existing rideshare market. We know that you can keep 1 million cars busy at $2.50 a mile, right? So we know that at $2.50 a mile, there's 1 million cars worth of demand available.
And real quick, James, does a $2.50 include tip, or does that not include the $2.50?
I learned a thing looking at the Chicago data, which shocked me.